Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'll be discussing a topic that is very important in language education and assessment: the defining grammatical constructs in language assessment. Understanding the knowledge, ability, performance, and metalinguistic knowledge. This presentation will help us understand how grammar is measured and why it is important to define what we are actually testing when we give grammar-related tasks. By the end of this presentation, we should be able to first define key grammatical constructs. These are grammatical knowledge, ability, performance, and metalinguistic knowledge. Second, understand how this construct change depending on the context. And the third one is analyze task and match them to the appropriate construct so we test what we truly intend to measure. Grammar is a fundamental aspect of language proficiency and assessment, as it defines how language elements come together to convey meaning. However, what it means to know grammar varies greatly depending on the context. This presentation delves into the core concepts of grammatical constructs in language testing, clarifying their definitions and their implications for assessment practices. It is critical to define constructs like grammatical knowledge, grammatical ability, and grammatical performance because they directly influence how language assessments are designed and interpreted. We all know grammar is essential in language, but did you know that the way we understand grammar changes depending on the context? In assessments, it's not enough to say we're testing grammar. We have to ask, what kind of grammar are we testing? Is it about knowing the rules or using them in communication? Grammatical constructs are ideas that help us understand and measure grammar. There are three main ones here. First, grammatical knowledge. This is about knowing grammar rules. For example, knowing that he go is wrong and should be he goes. Grammatical ability. This means being able to use grammar correctly in real situations, like writing a formal letter using proper tenses. Third one is grammatical performance. This is what we actually see or hear when someone speaks or writes. Why defining constructs is essential. Without clear definitions of constructs, the purpose and scope of assessments can become ambiguous. Clear definitions help. First, identify exactly what knowledge or skill is being tested. Second, align the assessment task with the intended goal of measuring grammar. Third, ensure that valid inferences can be made about the learner's language proficiency. These definitions also ensure the construct validity of assessments by making sure the task aligns with the underlying grammar theory. If we don't clearly define what we're testing, we can get confused results. For example, if you only ask students to fill in blanks with the correct verb tense, you're just testing grammatical knowledge, not ability or performance. The contextual nature of grammar knowledge. What it means to know grammar changes with different language use contexts. Different contexts demand different kinds of grammatical knowledge and ability. For example, in Scenario 1, writing an academic essay, it requires formal structures like passive voice, complex sentences, and correct tense usage, while Scenario 2 is ordering food at a restaurant relies more on conversational grammar and question forms, like for example, could I have this? Could I have that? Grammar isn't one size fits all. Different situations need different grammar. Theoretical terms in language assessment. Language assessment involves several abstract terms that have different meanings depending on context and perspective. Knowledge. The information stored in the learner's mind, for example, verb forms, rules. Competence. The potential ability to use that knowledge. Ability, the capacity to use knowledge effectively in context, and performance, observable language use during a task. For example, a student might know past tense rules but still make mistakes when nervous in an oral exam. Defining these terms clearly is essential to understanding how language proficiency is measured in assessment. What is grammatical knowledge? Grammatical knowledge refers to the internalized mental structures that allow learners to recognize and produce grammatical forms and understand their meanings. Key components: grammatical form, how words are structured, for example, verb tenses, plurals. Grammatical meaning, how those forms convey meaning, example, past tense indicates a completed action. This knowledge is stored in the learner's long-term memory and accessed during language use. Grammatical knowledge is stored in the brain. It includes form, how grammar looks, for example, verb endings like ed or s. Meaning, what those forms mean. Example, he walked means it happened in the past. It's the foundation of grammatical ability and performance. Components of grammatical knowledge. Grammatical knowledge encompasses both form and meaning. Grammatical form includes syntax, word order, morphology, word endings, and phonology, pronunciation. Grammatical meaning, it concerns how grammatical structures relate to temporal, modal, and aspectual meanings, for example, future tense and possibility. Like using will for the future or could for politeness or possibility. Let me give you a scenario about a French learner. A learner of French knows the structure of the passive voice être plus past participle, but is unsure when to use it versus the impersonal form un. She correctly identifies the forms but struggles with context, understanding that the impersonal construction is preferred in casual situations. Let's look at a real example. A French learner knows how to form the passive voice, but doesn't know when it's appropriate. She uses the meal was eaten instead of the informal on a manje. Key observation. The learner has grammatical knowledge but lacks full pragmatic awareness about form use appropriateness. This gap is important when designing assessments that accounts for context. What is grammatical ability? Grammatical ability goes beyond knowledge to include the capacity to use that knowledge in real-life communication. It is the power to use grammar in real-life situations. It involves strategic competence, the ability to adapt grammatical knowledge to different situations using cognitive and metacognitive strategies. First is the planning, thinking ahead about which forms to use. What should I say? Monitoring, checking the grammar used during communication. Did I say it right? Evaluating, reflecting on language output after communication. Was my grammar accurate? This is more advanced than just knowing the rules. Strategic competence. Strategic competence refers to mental strategies used to convey meaning, especially in unfamiliar or stressful situations. The metacognitive strategies, where is the planning, problem solving, and evaluating, while the cognitive strategies, clarifying, associating, and adjusting language use. The strategic competence help learners communicate even when they are unsure. The metacognitive strategies is about thinking about grammar while planning or checking, while the cognitive strategies is adjusting speech or simplifying grammar when unsure. For example, saying the thing you use to open a can when you forget the word can opener. Grammatical ability in use. Grammatical ability involves applying knowledge to real-world language use. I will give you a scenario about a student is asked to write an argumentative essay on the effects of social media. He uses a range of grammatical structures like modals, complex sentences, and conditionals to express arguments. If he used correct structures like might influence, if it were, or has been studied, he shows grammatical ability. He don't just know grammar, he can use it effectively. Knowledge versus ability. Knowledge is what a learner knows about grammar, the rules, forms, meanings, while the ability is how effectively a learner can use that knowledge in communication. Let's be clear. Knowledge is what you know, while the ability is how will you use what you know. Not all students who have knowledge of grammar can demonstrate that knowledge effectively in all situations, particularly under pressure. Grammatical performance. Grammatical performance is the observable use of grammar in language tasks. Performance can vary depending on several factors. First is a task type, the complexity of the task or language function. Second is the test conditions. Anxiety or stress during testing can influence performance. Performance is what we actually hear or see, but it doesn't always reflect true ability. Why? Because performance is affected by task difficulty, nerves, or even topic familiarity. Example, a student may forget grammar rules during an oral test because they are nervous. Let me give you a scenario about a Brazilian student's performance. A Brazilian student is fluent in English but struggles to interpret a graph in a placement test, leading to grammar mistakes when describing the data. A Brazilian student speaks English fluently, but in a test with a graph, he makes grammar mistakes. Why? He wasn't confident about interpreting the graph, so his language fell apart. His performance didn't reflect his true ability. Validation of constructs. Validation is the process of demonstrating that the assessment tasks measure the intended grammatical constructs. For valid inferences to be made, test tasks must align with the definition of the construct, reflect the language use context, be free of biases or extraneous factors. Validation means checking if the test really measures what it's supposed to. Role of educators in assessment. Teachers play a pivotal role in defining grammatical constructs. Like for example, asking what specific aspects of grammar are important in a particular task. How should learners demonstrate their knowledge and ability? As teachers, we decide what grammar to teach and how to assess it. We must ask what grammar is important for this task. How will learners show that they know it? What is metalinguistic knowledge? Metalinguistic knowledge refers to knowledge about language forms and grammatical terms. For examples, knowing what the subject or verb is, understanding modal verbs, etc. It's important for teachers and linguists, but does not directly equate to language ability. Metalinguistic knowledge is knowing about grammar, like knowing what a verb is or identifying a preposition. Useful for explaining language, especially for teachers, but not always needed in real communication. Summary of key concepts. Let us review. Grammatical knowledge is an internalized rules and structures, which is the rules and meanings. The grammatical ability is the capacity to apply that knowledge in context using them in real life, and the performance is the observable use of grammar in tasks or what we observe. And the metalinguistic knowledge is the knowledge about language, not necessarily its use. It is knowing the grammar terms. Together, this helps us build good assessments as future educators. In conclusion and reflection, clear definitions of grammatical constructs are essential for valid language assessment. Grammatical knowledge alone does not guarantee effective communication. We must assess both knowledge and ability. Grammar assessment isn't just about right or wrong answers. We must think about what we are testing and how we're testing it. Always ask yourself, how can we design tasks that measure grammar knowledge, ability, and performance? How can we consider context when interpreting tests? Does this task measure grammar knowledge or ability? Does it reflect how grammar is used in the real world? Thank you for listening, and I hope you now have a clearer understanding of grammatical constructs and how they affect language assessment. Goodbye and thank you so much.